Well, greetings everyone, and welcome again to God's Unchanging Word. In this week's edition for our news nuggets and insights, today is Friday, December the 8th, 2017. And as always, we have lots of information. We want to begin today with our focus talking about the continuing pressure that's mounting on God's people in the gay movement and business that's going across the nation. In fact, as we are taping today, which is Tuesday, the Supreme Court is hearing arguments on the famous case now, the famous case from several years ago of the baker who actually lost a lawsuit of two gay men who are getting married who demanded that he bake them a cake for their wedding. So we need to pray about that. Of course, we won't hear the conclusion of the matter probably for several months down the road, but I want to bring it to your attention to remember to pray for that because the future will mean a lot going forward. We're also going to talk about the continuing escalation of the nuclear arsenal of North Korea. And then finally, we want to begin a two-part program on the history, the roots, and its origins for Christmas. So let's begin with gay inclusive training. Now, you got to see this, and let's see if I can bring up something so you can see it with an overlay. This is the LGBT movement. Remember, it started with the LGBT, then it went to LBTQ at the end of it. So this came up this past week. I had to show this to you. LGGBDTTTIQQAAPP. Now, I'm not making this up. I'm not making this up. That was actually on this flyer promoting inclusive training in Ontario, Canada. Now, to be honest, though, it's not a real usage of acronym like you would think the LGBTQ is, but it was a way that they got the attention of all their teachers to be able to come to their training. So it's funny, but it's sad because this training right here is for training for elementary teachers. So what this is doing is teaching the teachers on how to teach the youth on how to accept in our society the gay rights. In other words, our children don't have a chance to grow up in a world that teaches and promotes God's way unless you're going to some high-paying Christian school or you're being taught at home. But I wanted to bring that out because I saw that on the news, and in case you might have heard that, it's actually just a way of getting the teacher's attention. But the acronym is growing, and you've seen it growing from time to time, as many as 38 to 65, now 73 different genders as you're going through. So I just wanted to bring that out. Now, on a less funnier note, but more serious note, this is an advertisement that's being put out by HewlettPackard now. HP furthers its commitment to diversity and inclusion with its latest LGBTQ-focused initiative. This is a spot with the advertisement and a picture that went out online and is being put on air, is a new spot that encourages the gay movement to join their team. And they're actually encouraging everybody else in the businesses around the country to hire the LGBT people in their inclusiveness. What's amazing, though, is through this is because the Christian movement who do not live by these standards, they're not allowed to be inclusive anymore. There is no more approval of your rights to be able to live your way if you don't accept their way. Our way is being condemned. Luke 17:28 says this, "Likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, and they bought, and they sold, they planted, and they built. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all." The problem with America is it does not believe that God exists, and He exhorts punishment for those who defy His word. And it will come one day, as we're seeing, the world and our society is moving further and further into the society like it was back in the days of Sodom and like it was in the days of Gomorrah. And we're moving ever so much closer to that. So that's why we continue to bring these things up to make you aware of what's going on around the country and how we continue that toboggan slide into the abyss of the warnings that God says, you must come out of her, my people. So we need to continue to pray about that. So if you've gotten some information and you want to share with us, by all means, just send it into the email address on the website, and we'd be glad to take a look at it, and hopefully we can use it down the road. North Korea, all right, this is really important what's going on in North Korea, and we've been talking about this for over a year now. And North Korea's newest test was November 28th, has brought the verbal rhetoric to the forefront of where we're talking about what we have not heard for decades, war. So here's what we're looking at. Last week, on November 28th, North Korea fired its highest ever intercontinental ballistic missile, flying 1,000 miles higher than its first ICBM launch in July. The trajectory that they put out, let's see, I don't have it up yet. I think I've got a trajectory in here, but the trajectory that they made and put on the news was showing that this missile now, if it took a normal range like a missile normally would, it could reach anywhere in the United States, including Washington, D.C. in the United States. So what they're doing now, they have moved and advanced their capability now to create the missile that can go far enough to be able to cover pretty much anywhere they want to hit in the world. The new mistletoe shows that North Korea is capable of hitting all of the U.S. mainland. That came out just last week. The state country's media made the announcement Wednesday, November 29th, hours after the leader, Kim Jong-un, ordered the 3 a.m. launch of the Hwasong-15 missile, which reached its highest altitude ever recorded by a North Korean missile. The other thing that was unusual about this, it was actually shot in the middle of the night. These are normally taking place during the daylight, and what they believe took place here is that he shot it in the middle of the night so that if it failed, there wouldn't be any tension drawn, and they would go back to the drawing boards and make another one and test down the road just a little bit further. Why North Korea's next nuclear test could lead to war. Now, that was a headline that I just read from the internet by a Harry J. Kisanis. All right, so I want to talk about this because you've probably not heard this on Fox or anywhere else. Harry J. Kisanis is the director of the Defense Studies at the Center for the National Interest, founded by the U.S. President Richard M. Nixon. All right, so he's the former director of that center. Now, this is what he has written about this recent test. He says, "I don't sleep well these days. My mind is consumed with thoughts of what could happen if my greatest fears come true. That North Korea makes the tragic mistake of conducting the first atmospheric nuclear weapons test since 1980. Now, what he means by this is he's talking about shooting the missile and testing it in the air where you'd have the nuclear fallout going everywhere. Unlike in the past where they've shot them underground, and just recently they've had a cave-in on some of those areas where they've shot these bomb tests underground. All right, so he's talking about them shooting off the bomb in the atmosphere. They actually give it a real-life test, spreading radioactive fallout throughout the period, the Pacific Ocean, and eventually all around the world. Depending on where he sets this off, the movement of the air, it could literally fall over Japan or over some other country, depending on which way the air is flowing. So now, here's what he said in some of the problems that came up. The North Korean official explained that there would be no diplomacy until the Hermit Kingdom proved its nuclear capabilities in a two-step process. I'm going to back that up again. So let me tell you what we're looking at here. He is now quoting an official in North Korea who said they're not going to talk about doing anything to stop their test until these two things happen. He says this: the North Korean official explained that there would be no diplomacy until the kingdom provided its nuclear capabilities in a two-step process. So no matter what we're saying, no matter what we're doing, no matter how many embargoes we include and continue to add to their nation, they said they're not going to talk to anybody until they do two things. They want to prove to the rest of the world they have the capability of doing two things. First, step one is to test a long-range ICBM, which has now been conducted successfully on 3 separate occasions going back to the summer. So that's the first step. Step two would be to detonate the nuclear weapon above ground. All right, so what was his greatest fear that he was talking about, that he wakes up with sweats? Is that they would do step 2. They are at the stage now that they have done step 1 3 times. They have done it to the ability of being able to reach anywhere in the continental U.S. And now what they want to do is they want to be able to test the next missile above ground. What's the problem with that? Here's the problem. Such a test would likely garner a military response from the Trump administration. I'll read that again. Such a test would likely garner a military response from the Trump administration, a response that could very well take us down a path to war. All right, so this is really serious. As I was listening to the news this morning, one of the reasons they're asking, why is time running out? Why is this so important? And what they're talking about now is that if they reach that step 2, then it will probably be too late for the United States to do anything about what they're doing, and they will have free reign over the rest of the world. Because if they have the ability to blow that bomb up in the atmosphere like they're trying to do, and they want to prove to the rest of the world, then there'll be no stopping them. So that's what we're looking at, and that's why time is running out. He goes on to say this: I have no illusions of what such a war would look like. Nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons used, millions of people dead, trillions of dollars in damage. That's what he's looking at, and this is the man who was the director of that organization that monitored and watched these things that was built back decades and decades ago. Now, let's take this to a higher level. This was nuclear North Korea with Nikki Haley at the UN. This is recently. This is not the first time she's been there. Nikki Haley, North Korean missile launch brings us closer to war, she says, and that was the headline. She says such a test would garner likely the military response from the Trump administration, is what I just read from the other gentleman. Said a response that could very well take us down to a path for the war. And going through is, she said, I have no illusions of such a war would look like with the nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, millions of people dead, trillions of dollars in damage. Just the other day, just a couple days ago, General McMaster, he says that the potential for war with North Korea increases every day. So we're not just talking about escalation of problems. We're talking about the real possibility now of an actual war taking place. All right, so this is what we're looking at. General McMaster, he said, what is clear is every time, and he reiterated, and he got real bold about this, and this was on Sunday morning, where he said, what is clear every time, he says, he conducts a missile launch, that a nuclear test, he gets better, McMaster says. And whether it's a success or a failure isn't as important as understanding that over the years he's been learning from his failures, improving, and thereby increasing his threat to all of us. So General McMaster is saying, and from his point of view, that time is running out. Nikki Haley has brought that to the UN, saying time is running out. The President of the United States saying time is running out. Now here's the problem. The people around the United States aren't paying a bit of attention to any of this. They just want to think that this is just Donald Trump having a tirade against another leader. What we're talking about here is serious, and these kind of possibilities could lead us into a World War III scenario, depending on where this is shot. The new missile test shows that North Korea is capable of hitting all the U.S. mainland. The state media made the announcement on Wednesday, November 29th hours. Okay, I think I've had this up already. Yeah, we went through that already. I didn't realize I had that slide in there twice. All right, so before I actually get into this, let me wrap that up. We're in a situation now that God says we need to watch for. So as the world seems to be going on its merry way, everything in the United States, things are getting better, people finding jobs, the stock market's going out of sight, it's moving ever so closer to the Luke 21 scenario, talking about the world in chaos, and we're at that stage right now. All right, right now. We'll continue to bring that up as we go through the rest of the year. Entering the Christmas holiday season. It's probably, for many people around the world, it's the most successful, happiest time you can ever imagine around the year. For police officers and for many families, it is a time of depression. There are more suicides during this season than any other time of the year. And for God's people, I want to bring this out now. For many in God's people who are in homes who don't have both mates or families in the church, this is a very tough time. So we need to keep in mind as we go through this holiday season, knowing that Jesus Christ will return and that the difficulty, the pain, the sorrow, and sometimes the loneliness that people go through in the church, that's all going to come to an end, that we need to hold fast until the time of Jesus Christ and pray for one another. So if you know somebody who's in the church and their mate's not in the church, and you have a happy family that they're together, why don't you invite them over? Spend a little time, talk to them, and give them the comforts and the joy that God is with you, and share that with them. All right, so now let's talk about this Christmas season. All right, we've got a few slides we're going to go through, but we're going to tell, as we do normally, we're going to use some videos. I got 2 of them today, both from the History Channel. And what I want to do with these 2 videos, they're both pretty short. One's about 2 minutes, and a little over 2 minutes, and one's a little over 3 minutes. And what I want to do is I want you to pay attention, because they're very well done, you know, as the History Channel always does. They do very well with their videos. I want you to see how they take its roots of Christmas, give you the truth of where it comes from, turn it around, how it's brought into Christianity, and how this is basically a good thing for our society. So let's play the first one. It's really upbeat about where the roots of Christmas comes from, and then we'll be right back.
Decorating trees, exchanging gifts, and singing songs about Santa Claus. It's what most people think of when they think of Christmas. But for Christians, December 25th has a more important significance. The holiday honors the birth of Jesus Christ some 2,000 years ago. But we bet you didn't know that in the early years of Christianity, Christians didn't celebrate Christmas at all. In fact, there is no mention of December 25th in the Bible. Early Christians couldn't even agree on which date Jesus was actually born. It was only in the 3rd century that December 25th became the official celebration of the birth of Jesus, most likely because it coincided with already existing pagan festivals. By the end of the 8th century, Christmas was widely celebrated across Europe. But its pagan roots died hard, and for many centuries people marked the holiday with wild parties, similar to Mardi Gras celebrations. This would lead some religious purists, such as the Puritan settlers of colonial America, to oppose Christmas celebrations. In 1644, the Massachusetts legislature fined anyone who observed Christmas 5 shillings, which was a lot of money at the time. In fact, Christmas as we know it didn't really begin until the 1800s. That's when Germany's Prince Albert brought his country's longtime tradition of decorating evergreen trees to England after his marriage to Queen Victoria. When an image of the royal family next to their 40-foot Christmas tree was published in American magazines in 1848, the custom caught on in the United States as well. The tradition of sending Christmas cards also started in England around the same time. Giving gifts is a relatively old Christmas tradition, with roots going back many centuries. At first, gift-giving had religious significance, to remind people of the gifts brought to baby Jesus by the 3 kings. But the Industrial Revolution and the rise of advertising in the 19th and 20th centuries made Christmas the commercial holiday it is today, even as it continues to have religious meaning for Christians. What about the most famous of all Christmas characters, Santa Claus? He's actually based on Saint Nicholas of Myra, a Dutch saint famous for giving gifts, who is known as Sinterklaas. In early incarnations, Santa Claus wore many different colors. But after a Coca-Cola ad in the 1930s showed him wearing red and white, the image stuck. From the date of the holiday itself to the traditions associated with it, Christmas has a long and colorful history. We bet you didn't know.
I bet you didn't know a couple other things. I bet you didn't know that what they just told you, that the original origin of celebrating Christ at his birth was at the beginning, was not true. Actually, the birth of Christ wasn't ever brought in anywhere in the New Testament, and it wasn't until around the 4th century, as we're going to show you just a little bit later. But isn't that just so warm and fuzzy to make you feel good? What's amazing is that through this whole thing, there's really nothing there about celebrating Christ. This whole thing has its roots in paganism, has nothing to do with Jesus Christ. When I first came into the church, this was 1971, I used to love Christmas. I'm going to tell you this little story. I came in, and the first time I finally went to church was around the middle of December. Now, I'm the kind of guy that when I like something, I really like it. And I'm the kind of guy, as you can see, I'm kind of built like Santa Claus is today. And I kind of been that way most of my life. And I actually literally would dress up as Santa Claus and go to all the parties I can go to, and I had a great time. When I was very little, my grandmother, who loved Christmas, and she had to found her house. All right, her house. I would go there during the Christmas season, and they would actually have the front 2 rooms of their home laid out with trains running across it, with cities running through it, a big old tree going through it, and you had to walk through this village, a Christmas village, and they had presents everywhere. So when you see the Christmas season come up and you hear the warmth of that music, many people, and this is why I talked about praying for those in the church, their mindsets goes back to a happy time. And so what Satan has done, it has taken a pagan ritual built on debauchery, built upon the Saturnalia, which we're going to be showing you over the next 2 seasons, built on the lewdness and deceit, put a Christian name on it, decorated to make it sound good, put wonderful music to it to make you feel good, put a bow on it, and said, this is Christian. What do you think God sees when he looks at this Christmas, knowing that his son had to die for the sins of this world to be able to put this stuff aside, when they take all of this and say, this is God? God hates these things. We're going to show you that through the scriptures. All right, so now before we go on and cover some of our slides, let's play the second one because it brings in a little bit more history and a little bit more of the foundation. And again, I'll be right back.
We've all heard the biblical origins of Christmas, but societies have been celebrating light and birth in the darkest days of winter centuries before Jesus walked the earth. In the Norse country, this winter celebration was known as Yule. Around December 21st, the winter solstice, fathers and sons dragged evergreens indoors as reminders of life and set logs on fire as a promise of good fortune. Ancient Rome had its own December festivals. 1 week before the winter solstice, Romans began celebrating Saturnalia, an orgy of food and drink in honor of Saturn, the god of agriculture. Some Romans, particularly soldiers and government officials, also worshipped Mithra, the sun god. It is believed that to this small but powerful sect, the birthday of Mithra, December 25th, was the holiest day of the year. By the 1st century AD, pagan traditions were being challenged as Christianity took hold throughout the empire. But Christ's birth date remained a mystery, since the Bible doesn't mention exactly when he was born. Since pagan Rome already celebrated the birth of Mithra on December 25th, it is theorized the church adopted the date as the birth of the Christ child. In the 4th century, the church made it official, declaring December 25th as the feast day of the Nativity. The church knew it could not outlaw the pagan traditions of Christmas, so it came to accept them. The evergreens traditionally brought indoors were decorated with apples, symbolizing the Garden of Eden. These apples would eventually become Christmas ornaments. The story of Santa Claus also begins in the 4th century with the death of Nicholas, a beloved Turkish bishop. The anniversary of his death became known as St. Nicholas Day. On December 6th, good children woke to gifts from the kindly saint. Bad children sulked away with nothing. In Holland, he was known as Sinterklaas. 1,500 years later in America, a seminary professor named Clement Clark Moore reimagined the legend of St. Nicholas. In 1822, Moore wrote a poem called The Night Before Christmas about a good-natured saint named Santa Claus who was pulled by a group of reindeer and came down the chimney on Christmas Eve. Like St. Nicholas, Santa Claus spread good cheer and gave gifts to children. Less clear was exactly what this Santa Claus looked like. Then in 1863, Thomas Nast, a cartoonist for Harper's Weekly, settled the matter once and for all with his version of the Christmas saint. Nast's Santa was rotund and jolly, with a full white beard and a sack full of toys. An American icon was born.
Well, there you go. Birth of Christ. Has nothing to do with the birth of Christ. And when you look in history, everyone knows that. Everyone knows that. So let's talk about now is the phrase is Christmas Unwrapped. And that's been used over and over again over the years, and I just found that little picture. I said, wow, that's pretty cool. Let me just bring that in because that's what we want to do now. We want to talk about the true meaning of where Christmas comes from, then talk about what God says about all this and things that we should be doing. The birth and the death of Christ, Christmas and Easter, these are the two foundations and the pillars to mainstream Christianity. Jesus Christ says if you're going to build a house, you want to build on solid ground. You don't want to build on mud, or you want to be able to build like on stone. But here's what we're looking at. The foundation of modern Christianity, most mainstream, with few exceptions, maintain Easter and Christmas as the pillars, the birth and the death of Jesus Christ. It was absolutely amazing that these pillars are built upon lies, upon falsehoods that don't exist. Jesus did not get resurrected on Sunday morning, as the Bible says, and we've got a very long series that you can find online called The Exodus, and it takes you through all of this step by step. It's in about 9 parts, and then we talk about there's another 3-part that was added to it, so there's like 13 hours of information talking about the lies behind Easter, talking about the plan of God. And the biggest here is Christmas. These 2 pillars have got families rooted. If they don't go to church any other time, they will go to church either on Easter or Christmas or both. Those are the pillars, and they're built upon lies. So here's the problem. They both existed before Christ was ever born. So now, what do we have here? We have our roots built upon the birth and death of Christ, but the problem is that both of these were in existence centuries before Christ ever came to this earth. So they have to be representing something else. Both had their roots in paganism, and that's what we're going to talk about now. We're going to talk about getting into the roots of paganism. Christmas was first mentioned in the 4th century, around 325 AD. It wasn't found until you find the history of Emperor Constantine, and you can go back in the Zondervan Comeback Bible, and you will find Christmas mentioned on page 108. That's the very first time Christmas is mentioned, and it's put a name on another holiday which was drafted into Christianity. Constantine merged several of the pagan holidays into one to be observed on December 25th. It was also Constantine who moved the Sabbath to Sunday worship and merging the worship to the Son of Christianity. In other words, where Jesus Christ says he is Lord of the Sabbath. In Exodus 31, he says, by this shall you know that you are mine. He said, this will be the sign that you keep the Sabbath day. What Constantine was able to do is take a sun worship, the worship of the sun, which was a big deal for the pagans in those times. And he could not stop them from worshiping on Sunday. So they compromised. They said, if you will worship our God on your day, then they would make it work. And that's what happened, and you began to see the movement from Saturday to Sunday. And you can read this in the Catholic encyclopedias. All historians know this is a fact. All right, so that's where Sunday worship comes from, the same one who began to institute the worship of Christmas in Christianity. Nowhere in the Bible does it state that Jesus was born on December 25th or anywhere around it. In fact, in our next program, what we're going to do is we're going to go into what the Bible does give us the indication of when he was born. The tradition, well, I want to clarify that. Around when he was born, because the Bible doesn't tell us, but there's a couple areas that we can look at that gives us a good probability about where Christ was born. The tradition of celebrating December 25th as Christ's birthday came to the Romans from Persia. Mithra, the Persian god of flight and the sacred contracts, was born out of a rock on December 25th. Rome was filled with strange gods and cults at that time, as they were through their history. All right, Rome had gods for everything. They had gods everywhere you turn, and one would move out, they'd move the next one in. All right, it was the 3rd century of unchristian Emperor Aurelian founded the festival of Dies Invictus Solis, which is the Day of the Invincible Soul, for December 25th. All right, this is just decades before Emperor Constantine. All right, so now let's talk about the December 25th and Mithra, which you heard in those videos by the History Channel. Mithra was the embodiment of the sun. So all of these things move around and evolve around sun worship rather than worship of the Son of God, which is Jesus Christ. Satan is an incredible transformer from light to darkness, and he has substituted a falsehood for the truth in nearly every single thing that God does. All right, so Mithra was the embodiment of the sun. So this period of its rebirth was a major day in Mithraism, in which it had become Rome's latest official religion. Constantine maintained Mithraism until his conversion to Christianity. It is believed that it was he that was instrumental in seeing that the major feast of his old religion was carried over into his new faith, maintaining the date of December 25th. Now, this is from the Christian Almanac from 1979, page 17. In other words, he, like the pagans of his day who loved Sunday worship, or the worship of the sun, they loved this festival. And so he did like he asked them to do with Sunday worship, is to be able to put a Christian name on it and observe it toward God, and that God would be glorified. So, December 25th in Mithra, as close as anyone can tell, Christmas was not observed by anyone until the 4th century, approximately 300 years after the death of Christ. And here I have a picture of Constantine on his throne with his Christian sword going on. Dionysus, right? Who's Dionysus? All these things, all these gods of all these different religions all begin to merge together. So when you go look in the history and the origins of Christian, it will take you back to Babylon. It's going to take you through Persia. It's going to take you through Greece. All these countries have different names, and they all come together. They all begin to merge. They're all talking about the same thing. They all begin to merge by the time of Emperor Constantine, which becomes law for Christians to observe. During the 2nd century BC, the Greeks practiced the rites to honor their god Dionysus, which is also called Bacchus, and Bacchus was the god of wine. Now, I want to stop for a second. I want to show you something. You see this picture here? When I went online to put this presentation together, I had a hard time finding a picture that didn't have nothing but nudity throughout it that I can actually feel comfortable to present to the audience today. Because in this debauchery of what they had is that it was filled with orgies, and there's little children around all of this. Everywhere they went, everyone's drunk, everyone's nude, and it's just a continual debauchery of what things was going on. And Bacchus, by the way, Mardi Gras here, they have Bacchus as one of the biggest parades of our season as it moves closer and closer to the Mardi Gras. Now, in one of those videos you saw, they talked about one of the celebrations reminded them of Mardi Gras. Well, as you're going to see, partly today as we introduce it, but more into next week, the actual Christmas going into 12th night actually leads you to the time of the Mardi Gras, which continues the escalation of the debauchery that was going on. It all ties together. It was never separated. Bacchus was the god of wine. When the Latin name for the celebration was the Bacchanalia, very close to the other name that we talked about earlier. It was actually celebrated on December 21st. The second pagan Roman holiday, very similar to that, was kept around the same time. In addition to the Bacchanalia, which we just told you, the Romans also celebrated another holiday called the Saturnalia, which was held in honor of Saturn, the god of time, which began on December 17th and continued for 7 consecutive days, ending up on December 24th. These often ended in riots and disorder. Hence the words for the Bacchanalian and Saturnalia acquired an evil reputation in their latter times. So as the new day came in that was a little more comfortable to everyone, they phased out these other gods as they brought in the new God with Invictus Solis for December 25th as they began to bring all these things together. They moved it on that day. They brought in all of the debauchery and they put them together and they made it Christian on December 25th. But that is the roots. It had reached the point that there was so much chaos and so much fighting and, as it says here, disorder during those times and the orgies, they had to stop it. And literally it took years and years to bring it to a stop through their Senate, because the Senate loved to have these things. But after a period of time, when Christianity began to move in and Constantine accepted it as his faith, it became law. The Roman holiday in Bacchanalia. As you can see, the Bacchanalia here with the picture with the Lady of the Sun. So now when you look at many of the pictures of Christ today and you see Mary holding the baby, what do you see? You see the same thing. What does God look at when he sees these things? God looks at the roots and where they're from, and he looks at what's going on and what's taking place and why his son had to die. And you cannot put a pleasant name on evil. It just will not work. All right, so the Roman holiday Bacchanalian and the Roman holiday Saturnalia are all celebrated around the same time from December 17th to December 24th. Later they moved it because of its orgies and its evil. Because of their popularity, they couldn't get rid of it. Try to imagine here in the city. Try to imagine, say, we're not going to have Mardi Gras anymore. What do you think would happen? Well, believe it or not, there's so much of the city here that's tied around the Mardi Gras, many of the businesses are going to fail. In fact, not too long ago, they passed an ordinance that they brought these people who would go down to the French Quarter, they would be on Bourbon Street, and they would carry these crosses, and they would pass out all the literature talking about evil Mardi Gras is. They literally passed an ordinance that they couldn't go into certain areas of the French Quarter because it was hurting business. That's absolutely true. So they kept the Christians out from letting people know that this is wrong with what they were doing. Because why? Because it hurt businesses. Same way here. It's because of their popularity, following their removal, these holidays returned, merged into the festival of Invictus Solis and the Day of the Invincible Sun on December 25th. And so they all became one nice, neat package. Eventually came to the name of Christmas. So when people tell us today that they're actually worshiping Jesus Christ on Christmas because that's the birth, they have no idea what they're talking about. As you just saw in the History Channel, there is no foundation, there is no roots, and it's not mentioned anywhere in the Bible, nor did the early patriarchs ever keep it. It's not written in any of the writings that you found. And it isn't until around the 4th century, 325 AD, that you begin to find even the name brought into this day and calling it Christmas. Observing God's laws. When God was bringing the Israelites into the Promised Land, God warned them not to follow the traditions of their gods. So we here in America now, we have taken the traditions that have been brought in for centuries before Jesus Christ was ever born, took those trappings and brought them all together and put a nice name into it, brought it into Christianity. And here's what happened. He says, just like with ancient Israel, when Moses was in the mountaintop, and when they had made that golden calf, what did Aaron say? Here be thy gods, O Israel. In modern day Christianity, whether they realize it or not, they have taken, here be thy gods, O Israel, the Saturnalia, the Bacchanalian, and you take all these Roman orgies, and they put a name on it, as if they had Aaron taken all these gods, thrown them into a pot, and it came out, and there stands Santa Claus. And all the entrapments that go with it, and say, here be thy God, O Israel. And God says, when he brings them into the Promised Land, he warned them of those traditions. In Deuteronomy 12, verse 30, beginning 29, he says, when the Lord your God cuts off from before you the nations which you go in to dispossess. In other words, when you go in and God takes these nations and removes them, it says, and you displace them and dwell in their land. Take heed to yourselves that you are not ensnared to follow them after they are destroyed from before you, and that you do not inquire after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? So what God's telling the children of Israel, that when you go into these lands, you do not seek to observe their gods as they did. God says you get rid of them, you remove them, you come out of her, my people, as God tells us in the New Testament. And that's what I'm telling you today. As warm and as fuzzy and as kind as you might have of your memories of the past, how painful it might be to have to separate from families during this time and not participate in the worship of Christmas or having the tree and all the stuff goes with it. God says you need to come out of her. If you ever have an opportunity to serve and care for those family members and around you, is to set the right example. God says, do not participate with these things. Do not be ensnared in their entrappings. Satan, the great counterfeiter. God has his Sabbath day. Satan has his Sunday. Trumpets and tabernacles. As best we can determine from the scriptures, which I'm going to bring in next week, from what we know from John the Baptist in the time of meeting with Mary, in the time of John the Baptist's father serving as the priest in the temple, we can put together that Jesus Christ was born somewhere around trumpets or around tabernacles, but certainly somewhere in the fall season, nowhere near Christmas. And it is possible that the days that the Roman gods had in the 21st, the 24th, the 25th, and all those days is what Satan has done. He has created the counterfeit to have people not look at the actual conception of Christ, 9 months later being born in the fall, but having everyone look to Satan and the sun god away from God. But nowhere in the Bible tells us that we even look toward that time of the conception. That is not what God wants us to observe. So Satan has Christmas as the birth of Christ, and as we have showed you, it is nowhere near that time. God has the Passover, which is the death of his son sacrificed for you and I. Satan has introduced what was called Easter. Again, a sunrise worship of the sun. As you see in Ezekiel 8, if you go back through that study, you'll see where God's people were at the temple with their backs facing the temple, and they were facing the east, which is facing the sun. When you face the sun in the east, that's in the morning, and you have your morning sunrise service where Jesus Christ was not resurrected on Sunday morning, as the Bible shows, and we have gone through that. And we'll cover more of that as we get to that season. Then another thing God has is Pentecost, which is 50 days from the wave sheath, which is just inclusive of the Passover and the days of unleavened bread, counting to 50, which is picturing the type of the first fruits. All right, so God has that for his holy days. What does Satan have? He has what he calls Lent, from Ash Wednesday to Easter. And all of these things tie in, all of these pagan counterfeits all tie in around the Christmas season to Twelfth Night, and then bringing them all the way through to Fat Tuesday, as it's called, to Lent, which is on a Wednesday following the debauchery of Mardi Gras, and bringing you to the 40 days of Lent till you get to Easter. And I challenge anyone to count 40 days, no matter what year it is, count 40 days from Ash Wednesday to Easter, and you won't get it. And I'll tell you more about that later. So just something to think about. Go back and try to count them. Pick any year and see if you can count 40 days and it brings you to Easter. So how do you get 40 days? I'll tell you that later. All right, next week. What about the Christmas tree? You know, that's a big part of Christmas, right? What about wreaths? Where did wreaths come from? How about that big old fat jolly man? We talked a little bit about that in the videos today. We could talk more about that next week as we go through that. So next week we're going to get into the customs of Christmas and how they have been carried down. All right, today we covered the roots. So what I want to do now is we're going to go back next week and talk about how we took these roots, carried them through the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, and brought them into America, and why the world keeps them today. So we're going to talk about that more in part 2 on Christmas. So make sure you catch News Nuggets and Insights next week. All right, here we go. This generation shall not pass. We left it up one more week. All right, here we have This Generation Shall Not Pass. That was a sermon we delivered back in 2006. And we brought it back in this year to talk about World War II and the bombing of December 7th from 1941. And it was a sermon that we talked about with a series of talking about the end time and talking about the warnings that God gave us. It's an incredible sermon. The graphics is not as good as we have today. It was at the beginning of a development of a church, but it still has tremendous information. It's online. It's not available by mail, so you have to go online to be able to download it. But take a chance. Take a look at, when you get a chance, take a look at this sermon, and it's going to be packed with information. I'm sure you're going to get a lot out of that. Just this past week, we mailed out the last edition for the year for the quarterly. The focus of it was the Doomsday Clock. And along with it, we sent the return card this month to talk about the Doomsday Clock, counterfeiting even the darkness. It's a real twist of a sermon where you would think the Doomsday Clock. It is not a doomsday sermon at all. Actually, it's a very uplifting, very positive, reinforcing sermon. So by all means, take that card and return it, and we'll get you a copy of the Doomsday Clock. Oh, some news. Let me share this with you. This coming year, Jim O'Brien and company up with the Cincinnati Church of God in Lexington has invited us up the Winter Festival this year. And for their movie night, every year they have what they call game night and movie night, which I believe is going to be on actually December 25th this year. They hold this festival, and they have, I don't know, 400 or 500 people of the various churches around the country who try to take their children, get them away from the Christmas environment, that they can focus on things that are more warm, family-friendly, and godly during that specific time. And they've been doing this over 20 years now. Well, this year we've been invited to be able to come up, and they were going to play for their movie night this year, The Constitutional Christian, on the big screen. So we want to thank them for that. So if you're interested in going, you can go to www.winterfamilyweekend.com this year, or just give us a call or check out our website, and we'll be glad to help you, get you to that family weekend. In the hotel that they have, it tells you all about it. It's absolutely like a 5-star type hotel, and it's only $63 a night. I wish we could find rates like that for our fee sites with that kind of accommodations. But it'll start on a Friday night, and it continues all the way through till Monday night at the end of Christmas, and then everybody shuts down and begins to go back home on Tuesday. So if you can make it this year, by all means, come on out and come see the Constitutional Christian on the big screen. And following the event, they've asked me to come up and do a question and answer session. So if you're there, come on by. We'll be doing questions and answers right after the video showing. So there you have it, our news nuggets and insights for this week. Now, I have something that I found that I wanted to share with you. I said, this is really, really good. People who call me up lots of times say, I really hate to bother you, but can I ask you something? Or I hate to bother you, but I want to talk to you about something. I come across this video. I think it's by the Skit guys who's put it out. So we have permission to be able to play this for you. It's just a little bit over 3 minutes. And it's from the position of everyone coming to talk to the pastor. So I thought what I would do is I'd close with this little humorous video and give you a little insight into my day. Let's play this video.
Hey, Pastor, thanks for seeing me. This is so great. I have been wanting to talk to you for quite a while, and to be right here with you right now is awesome.
Does it look like I have an appointment?
Being the children's minister, first the good news, because who doesn't like good news?
Listen, I've been looking at the numbers, and we are hurting, all right? We are bleeding with a capital B, okay?
I know you've been wanting to talk to me, but being the youth minister, I'm really busy, okay? I'm doing a lot of stuff.
But as building superintendent of this here church, I got a problem.
Singles ministry, it ain't working. No one's coming. You know it, and I know it.
There's only one thing I think this church is missing. Snakes.
I just really need to confess to you, my pastor, that the 10 Commandments, I've done all of them. Okay, I've committed all of them, okay? Except murder.
I am the chairman of the deacons of this church.
This weekend we're doing a junior high lock-in. That is a great concept, isn't it? I mean, whoever thought of that? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
What if we rent out the left side of our auditorium to that new hipster church, huh?
Here's my letter of resignation. I'm going back to work at Starbucks because they give benefits.
The good news is, with VBS, we had so many kids involved, and 17 kids came to know the Lord.
I was here long before you got here.
The bad news is we've lost one of them, Timmy.
And I'll be here long after you're gone.
I need you to have my back, okay? I need you to have my back because, I mean, the seniors, they are on me. Not my senior high class, but the senior citizens, they do not like me.
We're not using it. You're not going to fill it up with your messages. And here's the simple truth. That could help us out. What do you say? Hip, hip, hipster away?
Get out of yourself. Just get out of yourself.
How about we let Carl here loose on some of our congregants? See who's without sin and who's not, huh?
I'm sure this happens a lot in churches, doesn't it? No? Okay, well.
And by the way, I can't get that smell out of the band.
So just have my back, okay? I'm really, really trying. I got a lot on my plate. Do you see that? God has been talking to me really big time. And I think he wants me to preach.
Adios, muchacho.
Let me show you what I'm talking about. Carl. Oh, Carl's out. Carl's out.
No hard feelings? Don't mind if I do. Thank you, sir. Is that cigarettes?
You need to get right with the Lord or get out of here, because that snake's poisonous. I'm not kidding. Carl!
Well, welcome to my day. I saw that. I said, wow, that is so funny. I just wanted to share that with you. Thought we'd end something a little lighter humor today. And as we put at the end of that video, thanks for putting up with us, the pastors. All right. All right, that's it for today. Thank you for watching News Nuggets and Insights. Be sure to watch next week as we bring you part 2 on Christmas and the news and nuggets for the week. Until then, God be with you.